Section 1 is on Thursday at 1 p.m. My session, oh yeah, for the 4th, is on Tuesday at 1 in Hibbs 203, not in my normal Harrisburg. Okay, Hibbs 203. But I'll send another email out, just like I did this morning. I'll send everybody an email reminding you on section 4. All right, here we go. Don't look at the screen unnecessarily. We'll use it when we need it. What is the fundamental life source on Earth? What did you call it? The sun. Why is the sun the fundamental life source on Earth? It's always depositing energy in the form of light. What is it? Okay. We're just starting off well with this section. Tell you what is an example of a producer? Plants. Andy's book it out. Here's list the steps of consumption.
Like primary consumer, secondary, that?
Well, I probably wouldn't start with the primary consumer. I'd actually start with the producer, then the primary consumer, then the secondary consumer, then the tertiary consumer, then the apex consumer, and then decomposer. Somebody provide me my favorite simple example of consumption using living organisms. Don't use rocks. A plant gets eaten by a snail, that gets eaten by a small fish, that gets eaten by a... So, remember, even though it's not part of the questioning, that is a very simple producer to consumership. In reality, in the natural world, we have an entire web, and some consumers eat other consumers of their own plateau, and some consumers such as us, who are largely often considered at least tertiary, will go back and actually eat vegetation directly rather than animals that eat vegetation. So it's all a big web. What is essential to life? What do you have to have? Energy is essential to life. I mean, all of those things are also important, but you have to have energy. So again, if I were to ask in a different way, what provides the greatest source of energy for most living things? Good. Not ATP. What is greater in quantity, the primary producer or the tertiary, the producer or the tertiary consumer? What would you always have more of? You're always going to have the most of producing. Think of it like a pyramid. Producers are on the bottom, and work your way up to the apex consumer. Okay? Can somebody define energy for me? Technical definition. Energy is the capacity to bring about movement against an opposing force. In other words, energy is the forming and breaking of what? What kind of bonds? Covalent bonds. What is the movement of energy called? We don't have a lot of it in this room right now. How about inertia? And what is the measurement of inertia called? All right, let's backtrack. What are the two forms of energy? Yeah? What's it called, though? Kinetic and potential. Potential is your stored energy, kinetic is your active energy, okay? So when you're thinking about potential energy, I want you to think of like a battery that isn't plugged into anything. When you're thinking about kinetic energy, that's energy of moving objects. The lights being on is kinetic energy occurring. Light is moving. Heat, I think there's there. I think the heater's on here, so that would be another example. So, since we just talked about it, how does the transfer from potential to kinetic energy occur? As molecules break. Very good. What is the first law of thermodynamics? I'm just curious, how many people actually pay attention to me? How many actual laws of thermodynamics, rules of thermodynamics are there? Because I told everybody.
2.
No. 4. There are 4. You only need to know 2 of them, but there are in fact 4 of them. All right, what's the first law? Very good. What's the second law or second rule? Energy what?
It's released in the form of heat.
I would say that the second rule would be that with every, it states that every energy transfer between potential and kinetic will always result in a greater amount of chaos, disorder, entropy. And what is the measurement of that called? Entropy. What is entropy? Entropy is the measurement of the amount of disorder in a system. The greater the entropy, the greater the disorder. So therefore, entropy is, by pure and simple terms, the transformation of energy. Probably worthwhile to go back and look at your slides. You remember the little water heater? Look at that slide, the water heater slide. It's a good one to check out. No different than Pasteur's experiment. It's only supposed to put the idea in your head of basically the flow of energy. Okay? What is, Miguel, the definition of energy use within an organism? What do you do when you eat? Your body metabolizes. What are the 2 types of metabolism? Anabolic, catabolic. What is anabolic? The building up of energy. Energy in forming molecules of special type of carbohydrate, glycogen. What is catabolic metabolism? If we know that anabolic is the building up, what's catabolic? Breaking down. And what? I will only get that question. What is another term for anabolic metabolism in the greater scheme of things? What would we call that? What type of reaction? Endergonic. And therefore, an example, or what would we call a catabolic metabolism, would be exergonic. Quick way to remember it: En, entering; Ex, exiting. When we have an endergonic and exergonic reaction put together, what is that called? Not a marriage, but a coupled reaction. And a coupled reaction are, to be clear, reactions in which an energy-yielding exergonic reaction powers an energy-requiring endergonic reaction. So they are joined. What is energy made into? What is low energy made into? High energy. What would be the most important example of high energy? ATP. I asked this earlier, what is an enzyme? That? Give me an example. Use the example that I've used with you.
It pushes the car.
Okay,
So it's not, it makes it so.
my car
it's
is
not
broken
expending any
down and I'm
energy.
pushing, and you come along and help me push the car. You are accelerating my movement.
Right,
of
so
the
that you're
car.
not spending any energy.
You are the enzyme,
Right.
you're the protein that is accelerating the process. Okay? Everybody got that? So we can presume then, therefore, that enzymes are important because they work by lowering the activation energy, which is the energy required to initiate a chemical reaction. How do enzymes accelerate chemical reactions? Know it. They require, obviously, their own lower activation rate. They do not change themselves. They bring about no permanent change to the catalyst, and they are specific to one reaction and one reaction only. What is substrate binding? A substrate molecule binds with an enzyme in a specific manner to catalyze a chemical reaction. What are the two types of regulation? They're both allosteric. Allosteric inhibition and allosteric activation. What does allosteric inhibition do? The A, it actually is modified to not allow for a substrate binding. So always when we're thinking allosteric, we're thinking about our little Pac-Man. Okay? He has a perfect open mouth, and he says, no, you cannot connect with me. That is inhibition. Or he may sit there and say, you know what? It's not quite a perfect right triangle, but I'm going to adjust. Okay? That would be an activation. Anybody want to give a shot at what redox stands for? Actually, does anybody want to tell me what I want you to know and write down on the test as soon as you get in there about redox?
Oil rig.
What does oil rig stand for?
Oxidation.
Okay, so for those of you that have not attended my classes before, we're getting into equations or phrases that I want you, as soon as you get into the exam, as soon as it's on the very first question, you write it down so that you can remember it. This being number one, oil rig. You write that down, and if you can't remember what it means, if you can't memorize it, you write that down as well, which is oxidation is less, reduction is greater. Okay? So, can anybody tell me what redox stands for? Reduction, oxidation at the same time, or in a coupled reaction. Okay? You remember the little sample of the taxi cab? All right. So there was reduction to begin with the NAD plus becoming NADPH. Got in the cab, went down to Broadway, got out of the cab, and they broke apart. Oxidation occurred. Okay? Again, that would probably be your third slide that I would make sure that you have a take the chance to at least study and look at. I'm trying to, by the way, tell you which slides to look at so you're not looking through thousands of them. Rather, you're looking at the ones that you need to have some thought process about because they will help you in many instances. All right, so that would be the third slide that I want you to look at, which is the taxi cab. The taxi cab is all over his slide work. Don't necessarily worry about the chemical reaction itself. Just try to visualize the process of the chemical reaction so that you can apply it to anything. Very quickly, what does photosynthesis mean? What is photosynthesis referring to? And synthesis, therefore, is making. What's another name for a primary producer? Autotroph. And what's another example? What's another name for any type of consumer? Heterotroph. And therefore, what are we? We are heterotrophs. How many types? I don't know if this was on there or not, but this may just be informative. How many types of autotrophs are there? How many types of producers are there? You have light serving, which is plants, and then you have chemoautotrophs, which they work underneath the Earth's crust and never see the light of day, but they actually are able to produce for their own themselves. Okay? What are the two very basic components of a plant? No, xylem and phloem. What is that? It's the vascular bundle, the very basic anatomy of a plant. I know. What's above the ground? The root, the shoot. What's below the ground? The root. The root and shoot system. Goodness gracious. I hope you guys don't have any. Well, you can't have it there. I had my first final on Tuesday night. You have a final tomorrow? Who's doing that? Oh, what? Did they ever actually follow any rules in philosophy? Never. It's only going to be one question. It's going to be like, why? Why? Please write a 4 to 5 page essay in 3 hours. Why? Why what? All right. What are the two components of a plant, the root and shoot system? What is contained in the leaf of a plant? I'd like you to be aware that we're getting into photosynthesis now, so I want you to be aware that the leaf is obviously the stakeholder where photosynthesis occurs. If we were to describe the anatomy of a leaf, I don't think you need to look at the slide, but you do need to have a basic understanding of it, the anatomy of a leaf, not inside, but the exterior. So you obviously have two sides of epidermis on the top and the bottom, and within that you have, within the epidermis, within the body of it, you have mesophyll cells, and within the mesophyll cells, you have protective organelles. Chloroplasts, right there. The other noteworthy part about the anatomy of a plant leaf is that on the underside you have little openings called the stomata or stroma? Say it loud and proud. Stomata. Do not mix up stomata and stroma. Stroma is actually inside the chloroplast organelle. Okay? Say what? Stomata is the openings on the underside. All right, so chloroplast is an organelle with a membrane. And then in addition, what else is inside of a mesophyll cell besides chloroplast organelle? Liquid substance called stroma. I did those specifically that way back to back because I want you to recognize and not get mixed up and lose easy answers, the difference between stroma and stomata. Stomata is the opening, stroma is the goopy substance within. All right, since you already yelled this one before, what are the two parts of the vascular bundle?
Xylem and phloem.
Xylem and phloem. Which one goes up? What? I heard two totally different answers there. Xylem is up, phloem is down. Flow down. There you go. Perfect. Flow, like turning on a faucet, the water goes down. Okay? In this case, the food goes down. Xylem brings water up. Through what process? Cohesion or adhesion? Huh? Technically both. Yep, very good. But I would say adhesion would be the underlying principle. But technically both. Xylem, phloem, got that. Ba-ba-da. Another term for photosynthesis, got that. Greater cycle, got that. I'm only going to go over a couple quick things. Fourth slide that I want you to look at is and you will see a couple of questions on it. He's really big about it, but look at the light spectrum. Okay, that's a good slide, good section. There's what we got. All right, but I'm only going to go over a couple things real quick. Okay, so the properties of sunlight are that it is a range of wavelengths from 1 nanometer to 1 kilometer. What type of light does photosynthesis use? Visible light. What is noteworthy about light wavelengths? As you can see from up above, high energy, the higher the energy, the shorter the wavelength, the lower the energy, the longer the wavelength. Okay? You'll see that almost identical exact question. High is short, low is long. Best way to remember it is the double L. If you can remember the double L, then you can remember that the other side is opposite. Low energy, long wavelength. What are the 3 pigments that are used during photosynthesis? They are colors. No. Chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and orange. Very good.
What were they again?
Chlorophyll A, chlorophyll B, and carotenoids. Why is it important that there are multiple big pigments available for photosynthesis? Multiple pigments expand the range of wavelengths available. Okay? What does the stomata do? It's an opening that allows for
Light to come in.
not light, oxygen in or out? Out. CO2 out or in?
In.
Good. All of that happens to the stomata. What's the one other thing that it does? It releases something else besides oxygen. Water vapors. That really the water vapor is the oxygen gas. Okay, that's what I want you to remember out of that. All right, let's go over the chloroplast structure. The chloroplast structure is the intermediate. This is another one that I want you to look at. Now we're on our 5th slide. Chloroplast structure. Forget all the talking in here, other than understand what these are. Thylakoids. And the stack of pancakes is called the grana. Okay? And the thylakoids is where which part, without getting into the whole thing, what part of photosynthesis occurs there? The light-dependent reaction. When we actually go to the making process, we leave the thylakoid and we go into the, what's the goopy substance? The stroma, and that's where the Calvin cycle occurs. Okay? Definitely take a look at that slide or something similar to see the anatomy of a chloroplast organelle. All right, which comes first in photosynthesis? Somebody name 3 steps for me. Photosystem 2, then photosystem 1, and then out to the stroma for Calvin cycle. Very good. Now the cycle, the stroma. All right, sit for a minute. happens in photosystem 2? Well, it is, you know. Okay, so let's go through this. This is the everything up to the Calvin cycle. All right, so this is the photoreaction components as it says. So in photosystem 2, you have where water splitting occurs. So light energy is used to transfer electrons. Light energy being sunlight, I hope we should be able to gather that one. Light energy is used to transfer electrons to the primary electron acceptor. The electrons are donated by water. It releases oxygen and hydrogen ions as a byproduct. The oxygen departs via water vapors through the stomata, and the hydrogen ions go through the first electron transport chain. And during that, the high energy electrons are used to pump those hydrogen ions into the thylakoid. This form of kinetic energy is from the release of these ions to build ATP. Okay? So you have a lower form of energy in ADP, and its response creates a higher form of energy with the third phosphate into ATP. From there it goes into photosystem 1, in which the NADPH producing photosystem is identical to the water splitting photosystem, except that electrons are donated by the ETC from before. All right? And then it actually goes into yet another electron transport chain before it exits the chloroplast organelle, and high energy electrons are passed to NADPH, creating another form of high energy NADPH. NADP plus reduced with high energy with hydrogen ions, create NADPH, which is a high energy electron carrier. And at that point, all of that leaves the chloroplast organelle, leaves the thylakoid and goes to the stroma, in which the synthesis reaction occurs. Okay? I can't stress enough, and there is, when you guys get to this photo copy, I think this is the one. Isn't this the one where I have my little handwritten? Thought I did. Anyway, I'll find it. I hope somebody didn't take it. Oh yeah. So when you guys are making copies on this one, there's a handwritten breakdown of everything that occurs within the Calvin cycle. That's a good one if you don't already have it from me. All right? In my own words, it works. So, back to the Calvin cycle. So, should I do my drinking game here? Was that easy enough to help people remember? Should I do that again? All right. So there are 4 stages of the Calvin cycle. We have carbon fixation, we have energizing, we have exit, and we have regeneration. Okay? So, 3 molecules of CO2 come in. They go through carbon fixation first. All right, so CO2 enters the chloroplast through the stomata and diffuses into the stroma. Also present is the rubisco and RUBP molecules. Rubisco is the enzyme. RUBP is the actual molecule. The rubisco catalyzes the RUBP and the CO2 reaction, forming a 6-carbon compound that is immediately converted into a 3-carbon compound, which is 3-PGA that occurs right there. All right, as you can also see, 6 molecules or 6 ATPs come in and are used up and exit the process as ADP. That process, that step right there, the ATP converts the 3-PGA into G3P. That's the reduction process occurring here. So this and this, high energy, being used to convert the 3-PGA into G3P. No, you don't need to know all of these long drawn out, but it would be nice if you could recognize the basic terms. They do so, it says reduction, so it should tell you right there. They do so by gaining electrons. ADP and NAD plus result and return to the light reaction. 1 G3P leaves the Calvin cycle to contribute to the formation of glucose. 5 G3P remains to regenerate more RUBP. ATP is also used in the regeneration process, as you can see right here. And therefore, it takes 6 turns of the Calvin cycle to make glucose from 6 carbon atoms of CO2. So, in my terms, and I will step out of the way as I say it, at noontime, in the middle of a very boring class, you are fixated on wanting to go out with your friends. At 2 o'clock, you decide to cut the remainder of your classes, and you are now out with your friends. At 3 o'clock, you decide that you need a little bit of energy. So you go ahead and you order some Buffalo Wild Wings, some buffalo wings. You reduce by eating those. Then at 5 o'clock, and I'll assume that you can determine whether you're legally of age or not. At 5 o'clock, you decide you need a little bit more energy. You decide that you're going to have a happy hour drink or soda, depending on your age. So at 5 o'clock, you reduce even further and have a drink. But then at 6 o'clock, you remember that you actually have school and a 7-page paper to write by the next day. So you leave. But your 5 friends say, we did our homework, so we get to stay, and we get to do the cycle all over again. All right? That's the very basic premise of the Calvin cycle. If you can remember the drinking game, and you can remember that the reduction is occurring here, the 3-PGA into G3P, and you can remember that at 6 o'clock you had to go home, one of you had to go home, you should be able to get through the general process of the cycle as a whole. All right? I don't know whether that helps or not. Some people say it does, some people don't. It's the way I remember it. Does anybody have any questions? Calvin cycle is tricky, and it is the most important part of section 2. Okay? No questions, huh? All right, well, we're moving right along. Let's get to some very basic terminology. This is just memorization. Can anybody tell me what photorespiration is? It's where instead of oxygen, well, not instead of oxygen, instead of CO2, oxygen, part of the, what fixating? The carbon fixation, it would be oxygen fixation. Okay? Remember the term photosynthetic respiration, because then the next thing that you have to remember is that plants have evolved to address this matter. Okay? Now we have studied our very basic photosynthesis here, model here, is based on the most common photosynthetic process, which is named the C3. We also identified in class 2 other forms of photosynthesis, and they were the C4 and the CAM photosynthetic processes. So as we've already discussed C3, can anybody tell me what the C4 photosynthesis synthetic process is? All right, so again, we've discussed the C3. This is the majority of plants. It is a very efficient use of ATP, as it says. However, its problem is photorespiration, which we know is rubisco binding to oxygen rather than CO2. But one thing that you note here is that the mesophyll cell, and you can imagine the chloroplast organelle within, and then you can imagine within that the thylakoid and so on and so forth, and the CO2, the Calvin cycle is obviously sitting here of importance in photorespiration, but as the Calvin cycle is sitting here basically, but the point to remember is that C3 is a single cell. So certain plants who need to avoid photorespiration in very warm, humid environments, C4, corn, sugarcane, tobacco to an extent, some tobaccos. And basically what it's done is it's evolved into two different cells. You have your mesophyll cell, which is where carbon uptake occurs. Diffusion comes down to the bundle sheath cell. And the bundle sheath cell is actually what performs the photosynthetic process. Other than that, the actual stages are the same. It basically, in very short, is separating photosynthesis. It's problematic in that it uses up more ATP, but couldn't be too problematic because the plants still exist and they're happy. Then we go to CAM, the opposite of that. Again, it's usually a very hot environment, but it is an arid environment. Cactus, pineapple, orchid, and to some degree, the pineapple is kind of a misnomer because we know that pineapples actually do very well in humid environments. But that's a little side thought. What I want you to think about when you're thinking about the CAM is you're thinking about the cactus, and the cactus is the epitome. And basically what it's doing, in order to avoid water loss, because we know that water vapor goes out of the stomata, in order to avoid that, the stomata closes during the day. So everything occurs at night. It pulls in its CO2, and it releases the day's prior water vapors at night in order to control or utilize the avoidance of 120-degree heat. The problem with this is it's only going to collect so much CO2 at night. It still has to perform the light process during the day. So when that carbon runs out, that's all that can happen for the day. All right? So think of it as the bank, and when you run out of money and you only have $17 on your debit card, you're not getting any money out of the ATM. Okay? But again, the other point to also remember is that it still is basically within a single mesophyll cell. It's really only C4, if you were to see a question, only C4 that uses a bundle sheath cell. Everybody generally good on that? That would be my fifth slide, that I would make sure that I know. This one seems fairly intuitive, but I think you will definitely see something C3, C4, something to that degree. What are the two core principles of evolution? Common descent and natural selection. Very good. Common descent is like but not exact. Think your children or the children that you have someday, hopefully some of you. And natural selection indicates environment differences, create organism differences, and to some degree that if you do not adapt, you will not survive. Thus, a perfect example of that would be we don't see any short-necked giraffes. Okay? Similar to that, plants have gone through an evolutionary state. There are 4 principal categories of plants. My next thing besides Rick, for those of you that have attended my photosynthesis, does anybody remember it? Nothing yet? Wow, I'm hurt. Boys are silly,
Girls.
girls aren't. Okay? Or, in more readily biological terms, the four principal categories of plants, if you can write down BSGA and remember that, then you would be able to know that that is one, the order of evolution of plants, and you would be able to then go to the next thing, which would be bryophyte. Now it dawns on some people. Seedless vascular, gymnosperms, angiosperms. So now let's quickly go through this because this is really the last segment and we're really caught up here. All right? Bryophytes, moss. Little things, no vascular bundle. Low to the ground. Okay? Seedless vascular, a little bit of growth there. Ferns. A little bit of vascular bundle material is now developed, now evolved. All right? We're going through a more traditional photosynthetic process. Third would be gymnosperms, which another word for a gymnosperm would be you see this tree a lot once a year? Christmas trees. Pine trees are the third evolutionary plant. Okay? Just think Christmas trees. All right? And then finally, angiosperms, which are the most traditional plants that we see nowadays, although obviously we see a nice mix of all four, but angiosperms would be like your maples, your oaks, and then things like that. So one more time very quickly, some anatomy. Bryophytes, moss, closest living relatives to the earliest plants that transition from water to land. There is no vascular system, and they require very damp environments, and they are very low and small to the ground, and usually icky so that animals don't eat them. Eat moss. Seedless vascular would be an example I used of ferns. There is a vascular system, however, there is no seed. All right, the spore is dispersed. Gymnosperms are like Christmas trees, and there is a bearing of seeds, but not actually in the fruit. Pine cones, which is why I want you to remember Christmas trees. And angiosperms would be more like your cactus, your corn, flowering plants in general, as well as what I said, other other maples, things like that. And basically the gist of it is that there is actually a seed encased in a fruit, think like an acorn. Okay? Angiosperms require animal interaction to procreate. Okay? Does anybody, because we went fast to try to stay caught up, but I've given you the things that you need to succeed on this one. Does anybody have any questions about photosynthesis in general or energy or whatever? Yes, Emma.
What was the thing that you said about natural selection and something else?
We'll get to evolution again. I just wanted to remind you that the two pieces of evolution are natural selection and common descent. Common descent would be my children. They have similar structures, so similar, in some cases, DNA to me, but they are their own individuals. Natural selection, I use the example of the giraffe, and that we don't see short-necked giraffes anymore because they couldn't get the plant, so they died. Yes, sir?
Can you go over the FDA thing one more time?
Sure. 4 types of plants. And just understand, in principle, I'm trying to give you an idea of the evolution of plants, but the reality is that all 4 of these exist in today's day and age, all right? This is not dinosaurs where they've gone extinct. But, so the acronym, or the whatever you call it, mnemonic, is BSGA. And the reason why I want you to remember that is that, therefore, you can put the order in your mind. I use boys, silly, girls, aren't. Once you have that written down on your exam, that you can recall it or at least see it when you get to the questions later on, what you're going to be looking for is, in reality, bryophyte, bryophyte, seedless vascular, gymnosperm, like gymnasium, Gymno sperm, and angio, ANGIO sperm. Okay, you want me to keep going? You ready? Bryophyte is, everybody got it, or did you just need that?
I can do the rest on my own.
Okay. Bryophyte moss, seedless vascular fern, first vascular bundle. Gymnosperms are your Christmas trees, pine cones. And then angiosperms are encased seeds that require interaction with living organisms to move them around. Think squirrels moving their little acorns. Okay? Anybody have any other questions? All right. I'll just point out that I can keep going. I mean, I need a break, but I can keep going into section 4 for those of you that really have no interest on Tuesday to attend. I don't think they're going to kick us out, but it really is just you guys leave when you want. I'll keep going for a while. But next section in 10 minutes will be section 3, which is animal cells, cellular respiration. Okay? So let's take a 10-minute break. And I think that's all I have.